I am really excited to introduce Dr. Eileen McNeely, who is the founder and executive director of the Sustainability and Health Initiative for Net Positive Enterprise, otherwise known as SHINE, at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She's also an instructor in the Environmental Occupational Medicine and Epidemiology program at Harvard. At SHINE, her team conducts really interesting research on the impact of work and business operations on individual, organizational, and societal well-being and flourishing. Love that word. SHINE works with companies across all sectors as living laboratories to understand ways to positively impact the health of people and planet throughout the business value chain. She has been a member of GW4W since we were founded and on our advisory board, and we are so delighted to have you with us, Dr. McNeely, and to lead the panel discussion. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mim. It's great to be able to talk about this. As we started, we could talk about this all day. But I really like the definition that you had given to start off on environmental sustainability as a stabilizing force between human culture and the living world. Because that's very consonant with what we do at SHINE, is really think about sustainability as both people and planet. Because if people aren't filled up, they won't care about the planet. And that you have to go in parallel and together to see how these things are working. So I love that. Yeah, we do a lot of research on what organizations can do and what responsibility they can take within their footprint, and not just in avoiding harms or risks, but actually helping people flourish. And that is an idea of well-being that is complete well-being across multiple dimensions, psychosocial, physical dimensions, as well as financial, and ways that they can build work to be a seed for flourishing in the culture. So I'll just leave it at that because I can't wait to talk to our panel and hear what they have to say. We have two great panelists today. Jane Stevenson is the founder director at JS Global Advisory. She has over 20 years experience advising business on sustainability, strategy, and practice. She's an expert in the creation of global engagement programs to achieve consensus and drive visionary, measurable change. Her company supports businesses across sectors in aligning with the global TCFD reporting framework as part of a sustainability strategy. After her early career in the oil industry, where she was a leader in fragile environmental management, she has worked with clients in the natural resources, energy, food, construction, and finance sectors, building engagement and developing sustainability-driven strategies. She holds an MBA in business and a postgraduate certification in sustainable business, sustainable studies from the University of Cambridge. Thank you for being here, Jane. Our other panelist is Erden Eruc. He's a master outdoor athlete, accomplished ocean rower, adventurer, and ambassador for the Ocean Recovery Alliance. He holds 14 Guinness World Records, is the recipient of the 2013 Citation of Merit from the prestigious Explorers Club, and one of the 2013 Adventurers of the Year. 9 individuals changing the face of global adventure by Outside Magazine. He holds engineering degrees and an MBA. He's also the founder of the Seattle-based 501c nonprofit Around and Over, with a mission to educate and inspire children through human-powered journeys. Thank you both for coming here. I want to open the floor and the discussion talking about, where leadership is in sustainability, and think about what the best leadership comes from. Is it from the place of kind of personal responsibility, or is it financial risk management, or both?
Well, I'm happy to jump in there, Eileen. I mean, I think it's both, actually. I think there's always the personal as well as the professional in whenever you're talking about sustainability or environment. And actually listening to you introducing Erden, my fellow panelist, I'm blown away actually by your incredible achievements. And I think there's an awful lot of the personal in what you are bringing into this debate. So it'd be great to sort of just hear what you think about that. I'm dying to hear the stories. I mean, they just sound so amazing.
What are the Guinness World Records?
Yeah, I know. Beat that. You know.
Well, when what I understand from leadership is not so much taking charge and telling people what to do, but rather leading by example. And in my case, for example, the oceans will be there when we are gone as humans. What brings meaning to those oceans is our choices, and the struggle that we live on it. By accepting the challenge to cross these oceans, I am actually making a choice, and it associates those oceans with the meaning that I attach to it. So during my crossings, as I talk about the plastics issues or the environmental issues that we have on the oceans, and by making sure that I convey to everyone that I keep all plastics on board and that I have a self-sufficient, self-reliant existence out there, I am actually setting an example. And I am one example out of many that they can pick for themselves. But because I have that attention, I'm creating a teachable moment. And that I feel like I take individual leadership. I can't make people do anything, but I can set an example.
You know, I like this idea of a personal frame and fervor and passion. You know, there's been a lot of marches by young people out there fighting for the environment. And so, you know, just by age, we have our own frame. And I would love to hear about, you know, how do we tap into that, at least the perspective of different generations. What is the personal story?
I think actually you've picked up on something really quite important. And actually, towards the end of last year, I was involved in quite a big research project. It was actually looking through the lens of sort of perspectives on the climate challenge and the climate crisis, but looking through the viewpoint that has been particularly exacerbated by the pandemic, by COVID-19, and exploring whether that itself was changing attitudes and behaviors sort of in the wake of climate change. And a very key part of the research really sort of landed on the way different age demographics are viewing climate issues and the very different priorities that were being thrown up and vocalized by from those different viewpoints. You know, it's quite a big population surveyed for the report, and certainly 52%, 54%, it was over 50%, just slightly under 55% of those people really do consider that the collective effort is actually more important when it comes to the environment. But when we dive into the weeds a bit and look at how that pans out across different age groups, the data does tend to show there's quite a clear divide for young adults, for those in the sort of 18 to 30 age group. Changing overall behaviors and really quite dramatically reducing carbon footprint are the most important factors. But interestingly, and this will resonate with you, Erden, is in the over 60s group, the absolute key issue was plastic pollution in the ocean. That came in at number one, and it was way above everything else that was being considered. And in fact, in that older age group, over 30% of the group said that air pollution and that whole sort of carbon emissions argument had only begun to be really recognized as something they needed to be aware of and to start to understand, almost as a factor created and caused by the pandemic. And that may be just more of an awareness that, you know, the pandemic is causes respiratory problems. The older age group tends to be suffering more from that kind of problem. So there was a sort of lighting of the issue really for that sort of older age group. But what it sort of demonstrated was that the way the younger demographic views how to address this is very much an active way of dealing with things, whereas perhaps for the older group it was a little bit more passive. It was a bit more talking about it and reading about it and learning up on it. For the younger age group, it's getting out there on the street. It's doing the Greta Thunberg. It's you know, it's really making a point physically and driving activity. And you know, I think it's very understandable if we think about how the world has changed in the lifetime of anyone over 50. I mean, you know, for people who we might call the baby boomers and previous generations, you know, climate change was not an issue for them when they were growing up. Whereas for the millennials and all the generations subsequent to the millennials, they've been living this stuff since they were very small children. And you've now got a rising cohort of voters growing up in a world where environmental concerns are of critical importance and will continue to be so, and will continue to increase in their importance. You know, this is just revealing an ever-increasing generation gap on environment and climate issues. And actually, again, if you sort of look at that 50-plus generation, there were 3 billion people on the planet when they were growing up. There's now 7.5, nearly 8 billion people on the planet. That is an enormous difference in the space of one person's lifetime. And you know, the fact is that we live on a more crowded, more polluted planet, and young people are simply not prepared anymore to just let that kind of drift by and ignore it.
You know, that's fascinating on several fronts. One is what creates activism in terms of sustainability. And, you know, the context is everything, right? So if you grew up and it was never an issue, there was never education or awareness around that. But you also brought up like how COVID changed things, that people who felt more vulnerable based on their personal, you know, experience because of age or whatever, are now aware of it. I'm wondering, is there climate impacts that create unequal impacts by not only age, but gender? Is things different for women and men?
Yes. I would like to just make a comment on this. When I was traveling through Africa, I saw especially girls on the roads, on the roads of Mozambique when I was pedaling there, walking great distances to fetch water. And that was a survival issue for them. Not having access to clean water and not having access to the modern amenities meant that those girls, who are going to be young women and be mothers soon, had to spend an inordinate amount of their time during the day to go fetch the basic needs for their family. That meant time away from studies, that meant time away from other productive activities, and that labor just kept them away from all other economic activity. So that has a generational impact. That locks those girls and women in a social strata without income, without a secure future. And then when they go home, they spend a lot of time cooking with wood fire, exposed to smoke, and losing their health in the process. So combine these two together, there are huge health impacts and economic impacts to women in general in those societies.
I completely agree. And actually, there's been quite a lot of work done at the World Economic Forum, for example, on how this is disproportionately affecting women around the globe. So you think about the physical effects of climate change. We are experiencing much more regular heat waves and droughts. Sea levels are rising, and we are monitoring that, which is having enormous impact on coastal communities. We have a lot more extreme storms. The so-called 100-year storms is now happening every 2 years, and so on. And this can and does disproportionately affect women across the world. And that's because on a global scale, women are more likely to live in poverty and have less access to those basics that Erdem is exactly what he's talking about. And then you scale that up, and they have less access to sort of basic human rights stuff like the ability to freely move around, to acquire land. There's also the issue that in very challenging areas of the world, they often face systematic violence, and that can escalate during periods of instability, and climate change creates periods of instability. And these factors, and more in fact, mean that as climate change intensifies, as the world warms and more of this happens, these women will struggle the most. In fact, the Paris Agreement, the climate accord signed in Paris in 2015 at COP21, actually includes specific provisions to ensure that women receive support to cope with the hazards of climate change. And that clause was put in there for exactly this reason. And, I do some work with an organization called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which advises the UN signatory governments around the world on the impact of climate change and forward modeling of what this is going to do to the world. And gender inequalities are exaggerated by climate-related hazards. And that can result in higher workloads for women. Getting the water that Erdem is talking about becomes more difficult as the climate changes. But I do want to say that it's not all doom and gloom. I think we could end up going down a very doomy, gloomy, very negative sort of dialogue here. And I just want to kind of pull us back a little bit from that, because whilst the future environment is quite daunting, it's not all grim. I mean, women are showing amazing resilience around the world. They're leading climate action movements. They're championing clean energy sources, building alternative models of community. I mean, the film we watched at the start with Emma was just fantastic, demonstrating exactly this kind of innovative thinking and leadership and that kind of prioritization of sustainability and community and cooperation. I think it's really important to emphasize that there isn't a sort of simple fact that women are these sort of helpless victims when it comes to climate change. They can show such incredible leadership and have really transformative effects in their own countries and in their own communities, and of course that then can scale up. So I think it's really important to see what positives are going on in the world, as well as be very cognizant of the difficulties.
I like your switch to talk about what's possible and what's really good that's happening. And so with that, I'd love to hear from Erden. What is the Project Bay Ecuatorium in terms of solutions to thinking about the problem of climate change?
Bay Equitarium is an organization in the San Francisco Bay Area. They run multiple facilities, one of which is the Aquarium of the Bay. Their focus areas are sustainability and conservation, given the line of work they're in. And what we wanted to do with them was to use my journey as a tool to attract an audience and to then provide that audience with information about the state of our oceans and life on the ocean and the impact of humanity on life on the ocean. So uh, we want to have an educational partnership essentially.
Mhm, mhm. How do you build partnerships to be really strategic in moving sustainability forward? I mean, has the pandemic made it easier? More difficult?
No, the pandemic has really put a stick in my spokes, if you will. Speaking in terms of a cyclist, I am still trying to get things to move at a faster pace, but um, I cannot use the pandemic as an excuse to stall either. I went through this process after 9/11, having doubts about whether I should carry on. And eventually I did when I lost a friend while rock climbing together. And then the circumnavigation happened after finally committing to a journey. So I didn't want to wait for another tragedy to set me in motion. So the pandemic was not going to be an excuse. I was able to attract the attention of Ocean Recovery Alliance and of Bay Equatorium and Ocean Voyages Institute, for example. These are organizations that are concerned about the state of our oceans. Sustainability and conservation, as I suggested, was the priority. Ocean Recovery Alliance deals with plastics in our oceans and how to reduce that amount of plastics going into our oceans. And Ocean Voyages Institute is based out of San Francisco. They give cruisers and racers on the oceans they give beacons to these folks, and if they come across a floating debris ghost net that's on the surface, then they can tag that for later collection. Just this past summer, they collected about 100 tons of ghost nets from the Pacific Gyre, for example. So it takes a lot of partnership. When we pollute our environment, that material comes from somewhere. And that's material that's not reused. There's a $4.5 trillion value in circular economy just in the US. 80% of that is wasted, it goes into landfills. So that's economic value lost. And that economic value lost has to be extracted somewhere. So there's cost of extraction. We're doing damage to the earth as we gather these materials. And then by burying them or burning them or tossing them into the ocean, we are destroying the environment in the aftermath of it. So there's this cradle to grave kind of mentality that has been established. The economic habits that we have are cradle to grave, and we're never talking about cradle to cradle. So this circular economy has to become the norm. We have to change our ways. These changing our ways can be on an individual basis. Behavior modification on a mass scale has to happen. So people like me have to keep talking about this and make people aware of their own behaviors. And just in the US, we use 500 million straws per day. If you think about it, that's 2 straws per person. I don't use any straws myself, so somebody has to be using 3 or 4 straws a day. Where is this coming from? These numbers are huge. And if we can pull back on those and get people to carry their own straws that are reusable, washed, that's a start. But then also we have to deal with the manufacturing side of these things where products are designed and assembled so that they can be disassembled and the parts reused, renewed and refurbished and put back into circulation so that parts are not becoming waste at the end of the process. And that takes effort on all fronts, individual and manufacturing side. And then of course, on the user side, then we have to make it last longer. We have to repair things, we have to reuse things, we have to substitute things. We have to make sure that we can get the most economic value out of all goods so that we use less of raw materials in the process. So it is an enormous issue, and we all have to talk about it.
Mm. Yeah, I like the change of perspective from cradle to cradle instead of cradle to grave, because that didn't get us very far. Now, Jane, you work with a number of partnerships, both private and nonprofit and governmental. How do you solidify or build these, so for data sharing, for informing, for actually activating a different process in the cradle to cradle? Can you talk about a little bit of what you do?
Yes, I mean, partnerships have always been key to scaling up and to really addressing problems across an entire spectrum. And individual businesses or governments or institutions, when we're talking about climate challenges, are not going to be able to, have never been able to deal with this. It's too big. And actually, I think, I'd like to just sort of reference the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which were, these are a collection of 17 interlinked global goals, which were designed to be a blueprint to achieve a more sustainable future for everybody, for the world. They were set in 2015 when the Paris Agreement was signed, and are intended to be achieved by 2030. So we have got now less than a decade, just under 10 years to achieve them. And they are very ambitious targets. All 193 UN member states have signed up to them, has committed to the goals. And those SDGs, those goals, are designed to guide policy and, of course, funding over this decade. And according to the World Bank, around 1 billion people in the world still live in extreme poverty, and more than 800 million people just simply don't get enough food to eat. So there's a huge imbalance around the world in terms of resources and in terms of quality of life. And these goals have been designed to address what's needed to end all forms of poverty, actually, to fight inequalities, to tackle climate change, and actually to ensure no one is left behind economically as well. And to have any chance of attaining these sustainable development goals, partnership is the key. And in many ways, one of the most, if not the most important of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is the last one on the list. It's SDG 17, which is partnerships for the goals. They can only be realized with strong global partnerships and really significant cooperation. And this holds true especially for scaling up, for scaling those inclusive solutions, and in creating the technological innovations whereby we can achieve cradle to cradle in terms of our products and services. And actually, I think there is something we can draw on from the pandemic here, in that we've seen global challenges and a real existential threat like the pandemic, and climate change is an existential threat. It can't be addressed by a single government or a single business or any particular stakeholder on its own. So thinking directly about how the pandemic has underscored the importance of partnerships, it's sort of created and driven a reaction like nothing we've ever seen before. I mean, in such a short space of time, governments and businesses have had to respond to this crisis with a total reorganization of working practice, of travel, of social culture. I mean, that's why we're all sitting in our individual houses around the world talking on Teams or Zoom, or that we don't meet and that happened almost overnight in order to protect public health. And prior to that happening, you simply could not imagine such a rapid change in behaviors. You know, behavioral change is always the biggest challenge. So what advertising agencies have been striving to find the, you know, the golden ticket for forever. And bang, we've got it here. We've suddenly, you know, when the threat is big enough and is clearly understood, we can change overnight. And that's always been the thing we haven't managed to achieve in terms of the existential threat of climate change. So I think there are some amazing lessons to draw out of the tragedy of the pandemic, actually. Mm-hmm. And the partnership angle is absolutely vital. You know, and I think something else that I think is very important to sort of highlight in terms of partnerships for addressing climate challenges is that they also need to be very location relevant. So using local knowledge and expertise to tackle specific challenges which have global implications. So, I mean, I work with big global businesses, but who are working with local, regional, and national operational footprints. And that's where they're making a difference in, you know, small communities, in farming communities. And so you're bringing the power of the corporation down to the community level. And that's an absolutely fantastic blueprint for successful partnerships. And again, with NGOs, one of the things that is very much recognized by the corporate world in terms of NGOs is often there is the most incredible resource there in terms of knowledge and expertise and understanding of complex, really challenging issues. And let's be honest, climate is one of those. The physics of climate change, the social implications, the social justice implications. There are so many pieces of this jigsaw puzzle that have to be put together. But I think there's also, you know, it's worth saying that there's a long history of really great corporate collaborations with NGOs to solve environmental and social problems. I mean, well-known examples I can think of, GlaxoSmithKline have partnered with Save the Children for a very long time to help reduce child mortality. Aviva, the global insurance and investment firm. I mean, I've done a lot of work with Aviva on sustainable finance, and they partner with the Red Cross to help communities cope with disaster preparation and disaster response. A last one to think of, I mean, and actually, no, Erdem, you will have loads of examples of this where you've got, you know, local operational footprint with that kind of partnership backing. So I just think, you know, it's that there are many examples which have demonstrated how powerful this is. We have the lens of COVID to show us that behavioral change really is achievable and can be achieved really quickly if we understand the threat. Bring those together, and I think we've got something really exciting to deliver.
One thing that I would like to add is you mentioned that poverty and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. By 2050 will be 10 billion. And if we look at the economic status of world population, you mentioned billion people in poverty, and the numbers are huge. And if we want to elevate all the world population to a higher standard of living, and if that higher standard of living means that we pick up these single-use plastics from styrofoam coffee cups to water bottles, and we elevate them to a living standard that allows them to use such consumption behavior, then we are exacerbating the problem. We're not solving the problem. We are actually making it even worse. We have already reached the carrying capacity of this planet with the population that we have now, which is just about 8 billion now, 7.5 billion, and it's going to only get worse. And we need to bring everybody along. but we also need to make sure that we don't destroy this planet in the process. Space colonies are a fantasy right now. We're not going to leave this rock anytime soon. So change is essential. And without partnerships, what we do here locally, if somebody dumps plastic in the ocean, it ends up on the windward shores of all land masses elsewhere, and it gets carried away. I've seen it in Durban, in the east-facing shores of Africa. I've seen it on the shores of Mozambique. I've seen it on the shores of Cape York, with the trade winds bringing all this garbage. You have plastics strewn all over these beaches. And that's only the garbage that we can see, the trash that we can see. And without taking action elsewhere, we are not going to control the impacts, global impacts of what our behavior elsewhere. So I'm having difficulty putting it together, but you have to act locally to have global impact is really what I'm saying.
I think both of you are underscoring this real priority for working together. I love that we've kind of framed it, referenced the UN sustainability goals, because that is the blueprint for making partnerships. I know we have just a little bit of time left, but now that we've talked about partnerships and the complexity of this and end-to-end, what can individuals do or organizations do if they had one thing that they could do in the next year, in the next month? How do we take a simple step forward, all of us? Any wise words?
Well, I think one thing, it's very difficult to isolate one thing, but I will put something forward here, and not everybody can do this. So it's something that people who are fortunate enough to have some form of pension that they are putting some money into, assuming that that is actually quite a commonality, particularly of the working population. And I've done a lot of work with the finance industry, and sustainable finance is booming. I'd love to talk about the business angle as well, but I'm just going to pick up on this, the personal issue. The health of the planet is an issue for people in our everyday decisions. Things like avoiding plastic packaging at the supermarket, eating locally to, reduce food miles, turning the lights off when you're at home and you go out of a room, reducing the temperature you do the laundry at, taking showers, not baths. All of that stuff is fantastic. But, and while small lifestyle changes scaled up over the whole working population, or, the population of the Western world, the whole world, brilliant. But for those people who are contributing to a pension of any kind, there's a really significant lever that you can use. The power of your pension is quite startling. It's been researched quite extensively by the finance industry. And if you move your pension savings to a sustainable fund that is truly sustainable, and you can do plenty of digging to discover what that really means, it can actually be up to 27 times more efficient in reducing your carbon footprint over all of your activity than making changes like eating less meat, using the train instead of the car, taking shorter showers. And actually that alone, it's like give me a lever long enough and I can shift the world. If everybody did that, the shift of those financial flows into sustainable outcomes would orders of magnitude move the dial. It's quite a remarkable thing. And how many of us ever think about what happens when we just pay it in because we think, when I retire, I'll have a pot of money that I'll be able to, do what I want to do. And, at some point I will stop going to work and I will be able to do the rest of the things I want to do in my life. I think it's a remarkable thing, and we just don't think about it.
Thank you for that perspective. We're trying to get Harvard to diversify their portfolio into sustainable funds. So any help there? Any parting words, Erden?
I support Jane's input on that one. I can't beat that great idea. There's just some substance there. I mean, yeah, my pitch is always reduce, reuse, recycle, refurbish, repair before you buy a new thing. I mean, all of these standard messages that I convey out there with my observation of trash on our oceans. But I can't beat moving the pensions idea. That I think is wonderful. Yes, I need to look into that myself.
That's great. I like, we could do a little bit every day, and then we could do one big thing. It's move our pension. And then think partnerships. And
You have to do all of the above. It's just such an immense problem that it's going to take participation of everyone at every level with all their focus on this issue. We each have to do our parts, whether as company leaders or international organizations or individuals or family members, all of it, we can make a difference. So that is an empowering thought, actually, that we all have a part to play in this is really the message I think we need to leave with people with. And if they start thinking about this problem and they're aware of the problem, then they can start thinking about how they will reduce their footprint to save the earth for our future generations. So put it in the simplest terms, sustainability to me is, are we going to have the forests and the flora and fauna 50 years from now? If the answer is yes, it's a sustainable existence. If the answer is no, and we see it diminishing and getting destroyed in the process, that's not a sustainable way of life for us. So how do we make it so that our future generations will have the same standard of living and have the ability, the opportunity to see the same beauty that we have observed in our lifetimes? So I'd like to leave us with that challenge.
That's a very positive note to leave on. Anything you want to add, Jane?
Yeah, I think actually we can all be influencers. Even if you just set up a question in the mind of one other person, then you've started something. You've set a train of thought in motion that you can do something differently. And then you can be an influencer within your work, within your business. If you're in a senior role, clearly you can be very influential. But I think every single person can be an influencer and can make that the start of that journey and make a difference. And I think we all have to, again, bring an element of positivity to this, because there is always the risk that we can become so engulfed in the scale of the challenge, we can become overwhelmed and think we just, it's impossible. But actually we can't afford to do that. Mm-hmm. So we've got to keep that kind of positivity whilst recognizing all of the stuff we've gone into and the difficulties and so on. But I think, yeah, we can all be influencers, and we should all be influencers.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I want to leave on one positive note too, because you guys did such a great job. And that is, at Shine, we talk about, sustainability has always been framed about reduce your footprint. But there's another way to think about it. Yes, reduce your footprint, but increase your handprint, because there's so many ways where you can reach in and make the world better, and you have to do both. And that's such a good feeling. So increase your handprint. And now I'm going to turn it back to Mim. Thanks to both of you. It's been fun.
Wow.
Thank you.
Amazing, inspiring conversation. Our deepest thanks from everybody at Global Women for Wellbeing, to Emma Imperial for her interview, our incredible panel speaker leaders, Erden, Jane, just so inspiring. The work, the words, the wisdom really that we heard. Thank you so much, Eileen, for moderating this. We want to make sure that everybody can get in touch with everybody on this call should you want to learn more. I encourage you to connect with every single one of these folks on LinkedIn. And Erden, I have to ask you, we know you're starting your next adventure in a few weeks. Are you going to have your cam, your live cam this time?
It won't be live, but I will have a high bandwidth connection. I should be able to put up some videos, I'm hoping. I still have to figure out the technology. I just got the equipment. So there's
Encourage
my
everybody to
anxiety.
check it out. It's really, it's just, I got to see some of that video way back when, and it's really exciting to see it, firsthand. Jane, I believe people can reach you through jsglobaladvisory.com.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Wonderful. And I can't wait to get back to a Shine event at Harvard. I know you had to cancel it last year, but I know you have tentative dates. If you'd want to share those, Eileen, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we're actually aiming for the first week in November, the 6th to the 8th, but please check out our website and stay tuned. We have gotten a lot of feedback that people want to be in person again because there's so much energy in the room and we all benefit from that. So stay tuned.
Wonderful. Well, as we always say, this idea of using more design thinking and intersectionality could not have been underscored in a better way, I think, today, in terms of where we need to connect. I mean, all of us, so many of us are experts and bring such wisdom to the table, but without it being connected to real empathy, to real compassion and kindness, and understanding this idea that it really is cradle to cradle. I am definitely using that now going forward. I love that. And that this idea of connect. When we each bring our very best to the table and we can connect with each other, we have this opportunity to accelerate this positive change. So again, I thank you on behalf of all of us at GW4W for your leadership, your voice, and really that just positive change, fierce love that we need to have out there for leaders around the world. And we thank everybody that joined us today. Please send us comments, and we invite you to become part of the GW4W family, become a member, join this conversation, and we look forward to having you with us next time. Be well.
Thank you.